Welcome everyone, we're so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and joining us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis. We ask that you please note that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, and any actions taken based on the information presented are at your own risk. We are so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and join us for a brand new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Let's watch what this evening's podcast is all about.
9/11, 24 years later. How it has affected our mental health. On a clear blue morning in 2001, our country changed. 24 years later, we remember the lives we lost, the courage we witnessed, and the ways that day still lives in our bodies, our homes, and our communities. What we remember is not just history, it's also how the nervous system works. Anniversaries can bring waves of feeling, tight chests, restless sleep, sudden tears, or a need for quiet. If that's you today, you're not broken, you're human. The September 11, 2001 attacks were the deadliest terrorist attacks in human history, causing the deaths of 2,996 people, including 19 hijackers who committed murder. Thousands more were injured, and long-term health effects have arisen as a consequence of the attacks. PTSD and long-term psychological effects. Among rescue and recovery workers, PTSD pathways varied widely. Some remained resilient, others developed chronic symptoms, and some experienced delayed onset of symptoms, illustrating that trauma response isn't uniform. Studies indicate that for rescue and recovery workers, PTSD actually increased over time, reaching nearly 20% 5 to 6 years post-attack. In populations like bereaved family members, immigrant communities, and low-income groups, mental health struggles, particularly depression and PTSD, persisted longer and declined more slowly than in the general population. The WTC Health Program serves a significant number of people, over 112,000 members, including survivors and responders, many of whom suffer from PTSD and depression that stem from both physical toxin exposure and psychological trauma. Among those enrolled, more than 12,500 individuals have been certified as having PTSD related to the attacks. Common mental health issues tied to exposure and proximity to the event include depression, anxiety, stress, and increased use of alcohol and tobacco, often complicating daily functioning. PTSD frequently co-occurs with other disorders. Over 50% of individuals with PTSD experience comorbid anxiety, mood, or substance use disorders. For first responders, those with probable PTSD face double the risk of developing alcohol-related problems, and social disability, disruption in family, work, or social functioning, was 17 times more likely among those with probable PTSD. The World Trade Center Health Registry, the largest post-disaster registry in U.S. history, recruited over 71,000 registrants by 2004, creating a foundational tool for long-term health surveillance. 2 decades of data confirm ongoing physical and mental health burdens among responders and survivors, including respiratory illnesses, cancers, and psychological conditions, necessitating ongoing support through programs like the WTC Health Program. However, the WTC Health Program now faces budget shortfalls and staffing challenges, threatening timely access to care and funding for those affected. During this episode, we'll explore what many still feel 24 years later, why memories can feel now, anniversary reactions and triggers, how PTSD, survivor's guilt, moral injury, and prolonged grief may show up, why symptoms can appear years later, and most importantly, what helps. We'll offer practical tools you can use tonight, a simple breathing reset, a grounding exercise, and ways to check in with loved ones. We'll also share resources for responders, survivors, families, and anyone who still feels the ripple effect of that day. A quick content note. We'll speak about trauma and loss. If you need to pause, do. Step outside, take a breath, or come back later. Your well-being comes first. To the families who carry a name and a story, To responders who ran toward danger, to those who served in the days and years after, your courage continues to shape us, and we honor it by caring for the minds and hearts that carry those memories. If you notice persistent nightmares, avoidance, irritability, hypervigilance, or guilt that won't let go, help is available. Trauma-informed therapies like CBT, EMDR, and DBT skills can reduce symptoms and restore a sense of safety. And if today is heavy, you can call or text 988 in the U.S. for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. 24/7's free, and it's confidential. Veterans can press 1 after calling. First responders can ask for specialized support when connected. Resilience isn't be strong no matter what. It's be supported. It's permission to feel and the courage to reach for care. We remember, we heal, we move forward, together. Your life matters. Let's begin this episode with a prayer from Reverend Bill Bean.
The horrific tragedy that took place on 9/11 will never be forgotten. Images from that day are forever embedded into my mind, and the amount of sorrow that I felt for the victims and their families brought me to tears on many occasions. I would like to say this prayer in honor of them. Father, I ask that you bless, comfort, and lift up all who were involved in 9/11, from the victims, their families, and all the first responders. May they never be forgotten, and may you bring them peace. May it be so, Father, in Jesus' name. Glory, hallelujah, Selah.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Now, first, I want to thank the spiritual warrior, Reverend Bill Bean, for the wonderful prayer for everyone listening this evening. So, as usual, I'm Steve Hodgson. I'm here with my co-host, psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. We have a very serious show that we want to do today. The episode is titled 9/11, 24 years later, and how it affected our mental health. And really, a subtitle of that should be how it's still affecting our mental health. Because as we'll see from our guest that we have on today, that, that stuff never goes away for people. And I know for myself, as a former New Yorker. So today is actually September 11th, and we want to take you back 24 years ago. Now, we remember a clear blue morning that changed us forever. We remember lives that were cut short, the bravery of first responders who ran towards danger, and the ordinary people who became extraordinary in a single moment. We also remember what could not be seen on the news, the sleepless nights, the sudden startle at a sound, the empty chair at a table, and the way safety felt different, whether at home, at work, or even our own bodies. Now, tonight we hold the space for all of it, grief and grit, sorrow and strength. See, our nation is many things, resilient, stubborn, hopeful, and proud, and we're still learning how to heal. That promise of never forget is not only about the memory of the event, it's about care. It's about making sure the people who carried the weight of that day aren't asked to carry it alone. So on tonight's episode, we're going to talk about how large-scale trauma like 9/11 affects the mind and the body, what memories can feel like they're happening right now, and why anxiety can spike around anniversaries, and how moral injury, survivor's guilt, and prolonged grief can show up sometimes even years later. Now, we're also going to talk to a good friend of mine who I've known since 1972, Ed Kowalski, who's a native New Yorker. He's a business attorney and a former director of the 9/11 Families for a Safer America Foundation. Now, he also was in New York on 9/11, was working in Midtown, and he speaks on behalf of many of the surviving families. Now, he's appeared numerous times on Fox News, as well as the popular host of the radio show Hudson Valley Live Show with Ed Kowalski. Tonight, we're going to talk about resilience. That's not performance. Not stay strong no matter what, but the kind that breathes, rests, and reaches for help. But we'll also explore what real support looks like, from counseling and peer groups to community rituals, faith movement, and meaning making. Now, if today brings up hard emotions for you, you're not broken, you're human. Trauma is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign that something mattered. Healing is not forgetting, it's learning to remember without being undone. So we invite you to listen tonight with an open heart. Light a candle if you're able to. Place a hand over your heart if that helps. And even if you need to step away, just press pause on this video because there's a few things that are really going to hit home. And we'll be here when you're ready. Just hit the play button again. Hey guys, I'd like to pause the show a moment and welcome our newest sponsor, Waypost Counseling. Now, Waypost services are available to anyone in the continental United States via teleconferencing. At the Your Life Matters Show podcast, we are proud to have them on board as one of our sponsors. So I ask that you sit back a moment and that you watch this quick video about their services.
Let's be real. Life can feel overwhelming. Sometimes we lose our direction. And in those moments, reaching out for help isn't weakness. It's strength. You know, one of the most powerful things we can do for our mental health is simply to stop and ask for help. Well, look no further. Let me tell you about Waypost Counseling in Indianapolis, Indiana. Waypost was co-founded by husband and wife team Dr. Eric L. Davis and licensed therapist Aaron Davis. They started Waypost Counseling in 2020 because they wanted to create more than just a therapy practice. They wanted a place that truly walks alongside people through life's hardest seasons. And they offer more than just individual therapy. They provide individual therapy and couples therapy, problem gambling disorder, and consulting services as well. They work with adults navigating everything from ADHD to grief, addiction to life transitions. Every journey is different, but our goal is always the same, to help people pause, reflect, and realign with where they want to go. It's actually where their name, Waypost, comes from. A marker on the path, something to help guide your next steps. And for anyone listening who's been thinking, I don't know where to start, this might be the moment. Therapy doesn't have to be intimidating. At Waypost, you'll find honesty, warmth, and a practical approach to real change. They're here to help you find direction and walk with you every step of the way. Whether you are in Indiana or anywhere in the United States, help is just a phone call away. They treat clients in person or using video conferencing directly from your home. If you're ready to start that journey, visit waypostcounseling.com or call Dr. Eric L. Davis at 317-762-0904 or therapist Aaron Davis at 317-659-0179 and take the first step. Waypost Counseling is proudly certified by the Indiana FSSA Division of Mental Health and Addiction and the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. That's www.waypostcounseling.com. Your next chapter starts here. You need to make that first call.
For anyone needing support at any point, in the U.S., you can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, 24/7, free and confidential. If you're a responder or veteran, ask for their specialized support when you connect.
You know, there's help out there, and there's a ton of links that are in our description for this too. So this is the Your Life Matters Show podcast. On this day of remembrance, we honor courage by caring for the minds and hearts that carry our nation forward. Now, remember, this is not a political show, nor will we really discuss politics behind what happened that day, nor will we discuss conspiracies about what happened that day. This is a show about mental health, and no matter who is behind that day, what groups did it, what conspiracy theories there are, regardless, we can all agree that the events happened, and it happened to American citizens that day. And the mental health aspects of that are so often ignored and only brought back up when we're looking back at the events. So we're going to begin today, and we're going to delve really deep into this. Dr. Davis, do you remember where you were on 9/11 and how you heard about it?
Absolutely. I'll never forget it. I was here in Indianapolis. I was driving to, I was in grad school at the time, getting my master's degree, and I was in an internship, and I was driving on 465, listening to the radio, driving to my internship site, and heard it on the radio, and I'll never forget. You know, I heard the first, breaking news. Plane hit the World Trade Center, and then so obviously was listening, and then I remember when the second plane hit. And I'll never forget, at least the station that I was listening to, the host said, there's basically like, there's no doubt about it. We know this is an act of terrorism now. Basically it wasn't an accident. Um, yeah, that's where I was. I'll never forget.
It's amazing how the tune changed from the first plane hitting to the second plane hitting,
Yeah,
because the odds of two planes hitting it, and they weren't like, small planes. I mean, we're talking airlines,
yeah.
the big jets and stuff, and they don't hit buildings. And, I knew, as we had talked about earlier, I actually knew something was going on in Indiana. I was living in Indiana also. And my dad, who lived in New York, called me and said the whole apartment just shook. And he says, and now on the news, a plane hit the World Trade Center. And they're saying it was, an accident. And I knew right away it was not an accident. Planes don't fly over Manhattan, they fly around Manhattan. So if he felt that right over his apartment in dead center of downtown New York, there was a plane that was intentional. And unfortunately, I was watching when the second plane hit. I mean, I remember seeing it when it happened. And I remember my whole gut just dropping, that a second plane now would hit. And then let's not even talk about when the towers fell. You knew there were still people in there, and it was really sad. So, why do people still experience intense emotional and physical reactions to 9/11? Even now, we're talking 24 years later.
Think it just speaks to post-traumatic stress, really, um, when an event of this, magnitude, and keep in mind that it doesn't have to be an earth-shaking event for it to be traumatic for somebody. Um, and so basically these experiences imprint upon us, you can think of it that way, and our brain, equates, danger to that situation. So it really, post-traumatic stress is really our brain trying to protect us and keep us vigilant, about our safety or potential threats. But it becomes maladaptive because, post-traumatic stress can be immobilizing also. So, I think that's why different things trigger memories or, things of that nature. And if you think about something like 9/11, I mean, in a lot of ways, we were just talking about it's attached to everything, like your dad was a part of your memory, and he was in one area and you were all the way in Indiana, and
Hmm.
the same thing for me, where um things that you may not have initially even equated, to having anything to do with whatever it is, can become attached to those memories as well. So
It's
especially with
amazing
big, huge events like this.
because the first question I asked you there, where you were, and
Hmm.
it's amazing with memories like that. We can remember in detail
Yeah.
things that, you asked me what I had for dinner last night. I don't know, something. Okay. I
Yeah.
really don't have any recollection of that. But if you ask me about almost conversations, I can almost tell you word for word the conversations I
Yeah.
was having with the people around me when that was taking place. It
Yeah.
was really something that, and you got to remember too, as a New Yorker, to me, it's a lot bigger for myself because when you're watching on TV, like I was watching CNN back then, and you're watching Ground Zero, where they were set up, all I could remember was me riding my bike down that way because that wasn't that far away from where my parents lived.
Yeah.
And even going down with my band on a Sunday, we used to take publicity photos down there because you could stand in front of the big fountains and stuff on a Sunday. There weren't people down there. During the week it was really crowded, but
Yeah.
you could go there and you could take publicity shots everywhere. And, to be in my head sitting and watching, and they're talking, we're sitting at Ground Zero, and I'm like, yeah, you're right on the corner of Canal, and it's a lot deeper for someone like me.
Yeah.
So there's this thing called anniversary reactions. They're really symptoms that resurface around dates like September 11th. Okay, what are those anniversary reactions?
So in my opinion, a lot of it really has to do with the environment. And what I mean by that is, if obviously with 9/11, that happened on a specific date, and so we associate that date, with what happened. An example just from my own life, years ago, my dad, so Ron, my biological dad passed away in 2000. And, I noticed for years, he passed away, it was December 29th. So it was right between Christmas and New Year's. And, obviously it was traumatic, etc. For several years, and it's not like, I mean, I'm a therapist, so I work with trauma all the time and everything, but it's like I didn't really notice that, like when I don't know, I started noticing that my mood was kind of off, or I wasn't real very happy, or I was just kind of off, not and wasn't in a great mood. When the Christmas lights and stuff would start coming out, it's like, I love Christmas. What's wrong with me? Well, it's because obviously that I associate that with what happened. That was the environment. Snowy outside, it was cold, wintertime, Christmas lights. I mean, all those things. And so I think that's part of it.
You know, I try, like even when my mom passed away, I guess as I got older, I tried not to focus on that anymore.
Mhm.
People say, I see it on Facebook all the time, it's been, 20 years since, my mom passed away. My
Yeah.
dad passed. Well, you know what? I don't celebrate that day.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, if you want to say my mom would have been, it was a birthday, would have been a birthday today and stuff. Yeah, 100%. I'm behind that. But I don't really, celebrate a death day,
Yeah.
but like I said before, it's amazing how we remember different effects from that. So, how does the brain store all of that?
So the brain really, puts things, and think of it as like compartments, you
Hmm.
know. Um, the, when we're recalling information, um, things that are attached to, like, think of, like, my grandma Rose passed away, several years back. But when I think of grand, I can smell grandma. I mean, I can sit in here right now. Like, I remember exactly what it feels like to hug grandma. Um, it's because we're imprinted by all of these experiences. Um, and they imprint us in a lot more ways than we think. And here's something that anybody can do, just to kind of, try this out, I guess. When you walk into a restaurant, you know, smell, take it in, and try to think, what are all the different things you smell? And then 10 minutes later, do that again and see what you smell. You're not going to smell anything, because that's olfactory fatigue, And so when something is new and happening in real time, our brain's processing all of these things, and trying to put things where they're supposed to go in our memory. And with trauma, things don't get filed very neatly. That's one way of saying it.
I know if I'm in my car and I suddenly smell gas, or I think I'm smelling like a gas
Hmm.
smell, that's it. That's the only time I'm going to smell that.
Hmm.
And like my wife said, "Don't you smell that?" No, I don't. I
Yeah.
smelled it like 20 minutes ago. Now I don't smell it anymore. Okay, maybe it does reek of gas in here. I don't know. When it's pouring gas, some got on my shoe or something like that. Yeah, I have no idea. But I don't smell it after it's happened a few times. But you're right.
Yeah.
You can think back to that smell and you
Yeah.
can remember exactly what that smell was
Yeah.
when you do it. So why does like that PTSD sometimes delay for years before it comes out? I mean, first responders, and survivors still years later were talking about that they just started experiencing stuff.
I think a lot of times it has to do with just, the brain have an adequate time to process, because obviously shock is the first thing, in tragedy. Typically it's total shock. Like, I cannot believe this is happening. So the brain is trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Once the brain's able to process things and kind of put stuff where it thinks they need to go, let me say it that way. um, that it sometimes it takes a while for that to kind of kick in. And I've even had, clients where, like, a topic from their childhood or something will come up, and we'll talk about an experience they had. And, really they talk about it like there's no trauma at all, like no big deal. There have been instances where, as we discussed it, a little longer, maybe they remember more, or they see things in a different light, and they're like, that really that was really traumatic. I can't believe I didn't think that was a big deal. And I think it's so cognitive dissonance. Our brain is programmed to protect us at all costs, even to our own detriment.
And we will talk about that very subject, what you're talking about, in the future episode, because we even discussed that, I think, last
Yeah.
week off the air. Besides PTSD, what are some of the long-term health effects from like
Well,
large-scale tragedies?
so I don't want to say good effects of trauma, but one of the things that can come out of trauma, and does quite often, is resilience. So um, like a group of individuals who've experienced a common thing. So like for me, people in recovery, there's an instant camaraderie with people in recovery because we've experienced similar trauma, and it's kind of like, like the saying, a member of a club nobody wants to be a part of. Um, I think some of the long-term effects when tragedy strikes, I know for me, I something in recent years that I really struggled with was just feeling safe in public, you know. Um, and I'm not afraid to admit that, or ashamed to admit that. And it was because of all the different tragedies. It's like there's all these mass shootings and all these things, and I think it changes us societally as far as how we view our own safety, or what is safe or isn't safe, because those tragic events cause us to question things, and things that maybe weren't, that we didn't think twice about before, like, oh, I got to go get groceries. Now it's, oh, are grocery stores safe? Are they still safe? I mean, um, so I don't know if that answers it, but
Yeah, we did. Even had, for a while, we had someone lined up who was going to come on the show and talk to us, who actually was down working on Wall Street when it happened. And then, was months later, that some of the same stuff that you're talking about started to sink in. Didn't Things you never thought about before. All of a sudden, you're looking around. I mean, I've done it, when you go into a place and, you're not being racially profiling or anything like that. But I'm sure we've all have looked around and questioned, are we safe right now?
yeah, yeah.
This environment I'm in all the time. I always think when I walk back to Bankers Life Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, and if you parked in that one parking lot, you had to walk under the underpass
Mhm.
that was there, and you had all the homeless people that were
Yeah.
sitting there and stuff. One night we went passing by, and there was a guy who was zonked out of his head, probably called meth or something, and he was like throwing bottles at people.
Wow.
And the cops right away, they're down there and took care of it. But the next time we went for an event down there, I remember I was changed now. Now I wasn't just,
Yeah.
feeling sad for the homeless guy that was laying there, because I was freezing walking by. I could imagine him laying there. But now I was also like, looking all over the place, watching over my shoulder.
Mhm.
So yeah, it left an imprint somewhere in my brain. from what I saw, and it makes you question your safetiness years later. So, what about physical problems? I mean, does like PTSD and depression and stuff can cause chronic pain or obesity?
I mean, it definitely could, if a person's being docile and not, not moving around because they're, if they're bedridden because they're depressed, then obviously that could affect someone's weight. Ulcers. Um, I mean, when we're worried all the time, we're not at our best. I mean, and it's important to differentiate between healthy fear and unhealthy fear. Healthy fear is looking both ways before you cross the road because I mean that's healthy fear. We need to have a level of fear. We teach kids to fear the road, like
Mhm.
from the time they are babies. And rightfully so, for good reason. But at the same time, unhealthy fear is what immobilizes us. Where it's kind of like a deer in headlights. Um, where if it's immobilizing fear, then there's all sorts of problems that it could cause, health wise.
And there is treatment for that too. People
Oh
can
yeah,
work
absolutely.
through those things. Yeah. But again, like what we say throughout the show, you have to reach out for the help. The help
Definitely.
doesn't just come running to you. Now, we've talked about individual struggles, but how do events like 9/11 shape a society's sense of safety and mental well-being?
I think just like we were talking about it, as individuals, it makes us really as a nation kind of look at okay, it changes things, and it's kind of like, and if you look at look at TSA. I'll be taking a flight here soon. And obviously, TSA is much different, post 9/11 than it was before. So those are some indicators where things that we considered safe before, now we know they aren't necessarily, you know. Um, so and all we can do as a society is whatever we can to make things as safe as possible, you know. But yeah.
Let's talk about collective trauma. There are many Americans who weren't directly in New York, PA, or even Pentagon, in that area, but still felt shaken. Uh, is it that we all just feel, just in general, if something happens in Pennsylvania, let's say, do we worry about every time we're on a plane? I flew a lot, traveled a lot too, but after 9/11, I really calmed down a lot of my traveling. But you were looking for wondering if the air marshal
Mhm.
was on your flight.
Yeah.
Okay. And Jen and I used to play a game of, okay, figure out who the air marshal was, if there was one even on the flight.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you sit there and you're looking around at everybody that's on the plane.
Yeah.
And I really felt sorry for anyone who was Muslim or Arab or anything like that because they were getting some really nasty looks from people for really no reason at all. They were true Americans who were just as shocked as we were
Yeah.
on 9/11. But you know, I think that collective trauma starts to happen to everyone. We play off of each other's fear
Mhm.
and just make it 10 times worse.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's something I know we've talked about this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it lots more in future episodes. But, like even I've had to cut down on listening to the news, even, just because it's just there's so much negative stuff going on that I just don't have any more room for negative. Like, there's, you know what I mean? Like, um, and so I agree with you. I mean, I think that there's something to that where, um, there's, like I said, there's healthy fear. Like when tragedy strikes, we need to take a look at, okay, how did this tragedy happen? What do we do moving forward, etc. But uh, it it makes you look at things differently.
So let's talk about resilience and coping. What does healthy resilience look like? How is it different from just being strong or pushing through something?
I consider so my answer to that would be that resilience is really about kind of joining the cause, you know, um, where it's okay, this happened to me. I'm doing everything I can to, get better from it, to, take ownership of this and take back control of my life. And there's a lot to be said for that. That's being strong. Um, and that's hard to do. But I think the most effective resilience is really when we take those negative things that we've been through and use it to help others. And I always tell clients that, clients who are fighting through a situation in their life that, there are some, if you can find the situations that are where it's possible, you can use this experience to help other people more than you would ever know. Just having someone that says, I I went through something similar and I wasn't sure what to do either, or I went through something kind of like that, and here's what worked for me, or here's what didn't work. There's that camaraderie.
I watch a lot of YouTube TV because that's really all I watch. And I found myself questioning why I like watching like Midlife Stockman or Al Blades, these guys that go out and they cut people's yards for free for them. There's a whole bunch of people that are doing that. And it's like, why really? I'm sitting there watching something. It's like, why am I watching 40 minutes of some guy mowing and trimming trees and shrubs and stuff? But I think it's the fact that I know that they're helping somebody who can't do it themselves. And it's starting to spark a movement throughout the country of people that are actually going out and helping their neighbors.
Yeah.
And like you said, we have to be, we can't expect our government to do everything because we even have conspiracies. They're not going to do everything. They're going to do everything for their own purpose,
Yeah.
9%, 90% of the time. So, we as people need to go out. If we know somebody's hungry, we have a couple of extra bucks, In New York, we used to see that a lot, the homeless people there in the street. Buy them a cup of coffee. If you're walking down the street and you're freezing, think about that poor guy who's standing out there, doesn't have a place to go inside to get warm. You buy him a hot cup of coffee, a bagel or something like that.
Mhm.
Something what's it cost you? A couple of dollars? Or now
Yeah.
probably about five. But back then it was only a couple of dollars. Just buy them something and you see the genuine appreciation in their eyes when we help others. And I think a lot of what we learned from 9/11 is people willing to go and to help others.
Yeah.
And there are people that traveled from, I'll give a quick story on it, a chiropractor that I knew in Connecticut. And he used to fill in for the practice that we worked at. And he was telling me that he spent 3 months down at ground zero after 9/11. And he was treating, the first responders down there as far as, chiropractic adjustments and everything else. I mean, it really helped. I mean, these people work 14, 15 hours at a time. And he volunteered his time and he used to tell us some of the stories of what went on down there. And I'm sure that has adjusted my view tremendously. And I'm sure our guest Ed today will tell us a lot about, stuff that he learned from the families and stuff that were there. It really is sad what went on and stuff, but it also showed the number of people that stepped forward and came forward to help. And that's so, so important today. So, what are steps that people can take today if they notice they're like when they're watching this show, or I'm sure the internet's going to be deluged with these films of 9/11 and
Yeah.
bringing us back to we're even going to do it a little bit in a little bit
Yeah.
just to really set the tone of the show later. Um, how can they deal with that today and deal with that anxiety and sadness that
I
resurfaces?
think one of the best things that people can do is talk to somebody, that if talk to somebody um, about how you're feeling. A lot of times just even hearing our self-talk, and being honest about what we're going through is a big step. So I would highly recommend, talk to a friend that you trust, or call a professional, reach out to a therapist, you know, and just explore that. If you think there might be something going on or you're struggling, you're not alone, and there are tons of people ready and willing to help at
Now,
a
what
moment's
about
notice.
like all these, today, I'm sure 9/11, there's a number of remembrances, memorials, vigils, moments of silence that are going to take place. How important are those for our mental health and our healing?
I mean, I think that if it offers closure, if it is a way, for people to participate in, um, an act of remembrance or honor, I think those are extremely important things. To be a part of that, and to remember
But be part
what.
of it genuinely for the right reason, but
Yeah,
also,
absolutely. Yeah,
right.
yeah. Not do it because it's right for you. Not any other reason.
Yeah, you got to always remember the families of the people that lost loved ones. The one thing I can remember now, again, I wasn't in New York, but I remember afterwards we went, probably about 4 months later, Jen and I traveled to New York, see my parents, and we went down to Ground Zero. And I remember there was all these big wooden boards up around the site. You could only get up to that board. And I remember getting in trouble by a cop that was there, but I stood on something to look over the board, to see what it looked like for my own sake. And of course, the moment I got up there, there was a cop, get down. And I was like, oh, sorry. And I explained to him what I was looking at, but I remember walking along where I used to work up on 25th Street, and there was an armory that was over there. They used to have the homeless there, but all in that area were pictures of missing people. Before they identified so many people, there were posters. Have you seen John? Have you seen Mary? We haven't seen since 9/11, and so it broke my heart. Okay, when I was down there looking at that stuff, and I hope people remember what I remember when I watched that stuff. Not only the horrific feeling that it had, but for all the families and the people that lost their lives that day. First
Yeah.
responders, like we said, that ran into those buildings. I mean, they weren't, they didn't give a second thought going into the buildings and helping people. And when you start to hear, the radio transmissions of some of the people, the firefighters that got up to a certain floor, and then when the buildings collapsed, you didn't hear anything, radio silence, or the people jumping off of the towers, rather than burning to death, rather jump and take their own lives, have control over that. I mean, the other stuff I saw that has left a permanent mark. You
Yeah.
say it's compartmentalized, okay? It's in a bunch of compartments
Mhm.
in my
Yeah.
head because I'll never
Yeah.
forget that.
Yeah.
That's something we'll never forget. Now, before we continue, I want to take a moment and introduce our very special guest. Tonight, we're honored to be joined by Ed Kowalski. He's a native New Yorker whose life, like so many, has forever changed on September 11, 2001. See, in the months that followed, Ed served as director of the 9/11 Families for a Secure America Foundation, and he worked closely with families who lost loved ones, listening to their stories, advocating for their needs, and helping to sustain a community of remembrance and caring, and making sure the future security of our country was addressed. Now, Ed brings two powerful perspectives to the conversation: the personal lens of a New Yorker who lived through that day, I mean, was right in Midtown Manhattan, and the broader view of someone who walked alongside families in the years that followed. His work has been about honoring lives, elevating voices, and supporting people through a long arc of grief and healing. See, I've known Ed since 1972 as a freshman in high school, as we both attended Xavier High School, a Jesuit high school in New York City, with an ROTC program. In fact, Ed even appeared on a couple of the earlier versions of the Your Life Matters show with Jen and Steve that go like way back. Um, with over 20 years of experience helping local employees navigate the complexities and legal absurdities that they often face. Ed has been a passionate advocate for addressing the regulatory burdens that can overwhelm small businesses. He works as a lawyer for this. He's also committed to holding politicians accountable for their actions and policies that impact the local economy and the local communities. Understand he's no stranger to television and radio. He's appeared many times on Fox News, on the Hannity Show, in fact, too. He's been the host of Hudson Valley This Morning with Ed Kowalski, where he shone a light on the remarkable individuals making a difference in that community, in the neighborhood. So we ask that you please join me in giving a welcome to a good friend, Ed Kowalski, to Your Life Matters Show podcast. Well, Ed Kowalski, thank you for being here with us and for all the hard work that you've done. Dr. Davis and I are grateful, especially on some short notice, for you coming on here and being with us, because you're still a very busy gentleman, even to this very day.
I am, Steve. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so Ed, as a native New Yorker, what do you remember most about that day? Like, where were you? What did you see? How did it shape your perspective of New York?
Oh boy. Like I said, the thing that I remember the most about 9/11, it was a singularly beautiful day in New York City. It was one of those, the sun was not too hot in the sky that day, as that James Taylor song goes. It was just a beautiful, beautiful morning. And I was dragging myself to work that day because it was just, it was so beautiful. And I can remember remarking just how wonderfully beautiful the day was. And of course, I got into the office, and as I said to you earlier, I said, I don't. When somebody came in and said, "Gee, a plane hit the Trade Center," my first reaction was a Cessna, small commercial plane. I didn't really understand that it was a commercial jet. And then, of course, when somebody else came in about a half hour later and said a second plane had hit, I still didn't link the dots in terms of what was going on. And I can remember I went to a big conference room where the firm that I was working with had a TV in it, and I was just trying to process what was happening as in real time kind of thing. And then selfishly, my daughter at that point in time, she might have been 11, maybe 10, and I just wanted to make sure I could get a hold of her. And of course, the other thing that I remember from that day is that the phone lines, it was very difficult to get an outside line, because all the circuits were jammed.
Well, everybody was doing the same thing you did.
Right.
As far as contacting
all the circuits were jammed, couldn't get out. And then finally, what ended up happening is I can remember I just wanted to get out of the city. So, I hung around the office till about 1 o'clock or so, tried to process the news. And then I was living up in Westchester County at that time, and I hopped on the Metro North train out of Grand Central. And then the second thing that I remember from that day, Steve, it was singularly quiet. The conductors didn't make any announcements pertaining to station stops. They didn't collect tickets. The train was just on autopilot. And people that were on the train that day there was no conversation. Everyone was just sort of sitting in stunned silence in terms of what was happening. And then, interestingly enough, the other thing that I remember is that night, the place where I was living, it was in Bronxville, New York. And that's about, I don't know, 18 miles north of the Trade Center in terms of just in lower Westchester County. And I can remember having the screen door to my deck opened. And I can remember smelling what I thought was like an electrical smell. I can remember, I'm like, gosh, something, Steve, I almost flashed back to remembering what it was like when we were kids playing with electrical trains. Right. That sort of, that smell. And I can remember, I was like, wow, is something burning? Is there a frayed wire in the house? And it wasn't. And then it took me a while to realize that what I was smelling was coming from the Trade Center. And I was like, oh my God, and then of course I did I called my family. I let everybody know that we were okay. I wanted to make sure that everybody else was okay in the family. Fortunately, everybody was. My dad was a fireman, and he had since retired. But he was on the phone too, trying to be able to just sort of figure things out with the New York City Fire Department. And then, of course, when I just stunned, I was shocked in terms of what happened. And I guess Dr. Davis, I couldn't process it. I was overwhelmed in terms of just trying to comprehend what occurred.
Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for another great episode with your host Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Please remember to subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. Your help with this helps us reach a wider audience that may need our help. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are valuable and important. Take time to cherish yourself and those around you. Never forget, your life matters.